The Grand Synod of the Ethelgard did not sit in chairs, nor did they stand upon floors of stone or metal. They hovered, suspended in the amber suspension fields of the high spire, a structure of crystalline geopolymers that pierced the upper atmosphere of their capital world, Kalar. Here, gravity was a suggestion, a variable to be tuned by the whims of the high hierarchs, the masters of the galactic concordat. The atmosphere within the spire was thick, not merely with the scented oxidizers required for Ethelgard respiration, but with the suffocating weight of history, tradition, and an unshakable belief in the immutable laws of the cosmos. To the Ethelgard, the universe was a clockwork mechanism of divine geometric perfection. Stars were born in calculated nurseries, gravity wells were the anchors of civilization, and life itself was a biological imperative that followed a strict linear progression from muck to sentience to dust. There was order, there was law, and there was blood, the lineage of species that adhered to the great cycle. But today, the amber fields vibrated with a dissonance that tasted of copper and fear. The light within the chamber, usually a calming, rhythmic pulse of bioluminescent gold, was erratic, flickering with the harsh violet of emergency protocols. Hierarch Valen, the eldest of the council, his carapace etched with the laser scrimshaw of 3 centuries of governance, extended a manipulator limb, pointing toward the central holographic projection that dominated the hollow space of the chamber. The projection displayed a sector of space near the galactic rim, a region known as the Veiled Expanse, where the fabric of spacetime was notoriously thin and unstable. The Concordat had long forbidden travel there, citing the dangers of gravitational shear and the chaotic radiation of dying stars. It was a graveyard of physics, a place where the law should have rendered existence impossible for anything larger than a microbe. Yet there was a signal. It was not a radio wave, nor a tachyon burst, nor a gravimetric ripple of the kind the Ethelgard engines produced. It was a tear, a laceration in the skin of reality itself. Valen's voice, a resonant thrum produced by the friction of his chitinous plates, filled the chamber, amplified by the acoustics of the spire. He spoke not of war, but of heresy. The sensor readings coming from the expanse did not make sense. They showed an object of impossible mass moving without inertia, a vessel that did not ride the currents of hyperspace but seemed to grab the fabric of the universe and drag itself forward hand over hand, ignoring the friction of reality. To the Ethelgard, whose entire civilization was built on the graceful, mathematical surfing of subspace tides, this was an abomination. It was ugly. It was brute force applied to the delicate equations of existence. It was human. The debate had raged for 3 rotations of the planet. The younger races of the Concordat, the fluidic Authari, the stoic, rock-skinned golems of Hax, watched from the lower tiers of the projection sphere, silent and terrified. They had heard the rumors of the species from the Orion arm. They had heard of the hairless bipeds who did not adapt to their environments but forced their environments to adapt to them. But rumors were one thing. The shadow descending upon the outer sensors was another. The telemetry suggested a vessel of such magnitude that its very presence exerted tidal forces on the nearby asteroids. It did not reflect starlight, it absorbed it. It was a void in the visual spectrum, a hole in the heavens where stars simply ceased to exist. Hierarch Valen dismissed the Authari diplomat's query with a dismissive wave of his primary claw. The Authari, a creature of soft membranes and high intellect, had dared to suggest that perhaps the object was a natural phenomenon, a wandering black hole or a dense nebula. Valen knew better. Nature possessed a symmetry that this object lacked. This was manufactured. It was a construct of metal and will, forged by minds that did not fear the consequences of breaking the fundamental constants. Valen argued that this was not merely an incursion, it was an insult to the grand design. If a ship could move without respecting the curve of space, if it could carry mass without respecting the limits of propulsion, then the Ethelgard's understanding of the universe was flawed. And if their understanding was flawed, their right to rule the Concordat was flawed. This was the true source of the fear that sweated from the walls of the high spire. It was not the fear of death, it was the fear of obsolescence. The censor officer, a subordinate Ethelgard whose shell was still soft with youth, interrupted the silence with a chirp of panic. The object had shifted. It was no longer in the expanse. In the time it took to draw a breath, the anomaly had crossed a distance that should have taken a conventional drive weeks to traverse. It was Not warping, it was tunneling, collapsing the distance between 2 points like a god folding a map. The holographic display fractured, unable to render the physics of the transition, and then reassembled to show the object sitting in high orbit over Kalar. It had bypassed the fleets. It had bypassed the orbital defense grids. It had bypassed the interception networks. It simply appeared, a monolith of matte black composite and scarring, hanging above their capital like a guillotine blade waiting for the signal to drop. Silence descended upon the Grand Synod. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the hum of the suspension fields. The vessel was colossal. It possessed no sleek lines, no aerodynamic curves, no aesthetic concessions to beauty. It was a brick, a brutalist slab of engineering that looked as though it had been carved from the bedrock of a dead planet. Its surface was pitted with the impacts of cosmic debris and the burns of weapons fire from wars the Concordat had never known. There were no visible engines, only vast, glowing vents that bled a strange, Cherenkov blue radiation into the vacuum. And along its flank, illuminated by the harsh light of Kaler's sun, were glyphs, sharp, angular markings that the translation software struggled to decode before finally resolving them into a primitive, guttural language. UNSC Acheron. The humans had arrived. They did not hail the planet. They did not demand surrender. They simply sat there, their ship casting a shadow that plunged the high spire into an artificial twilight. The Ethelgard military commanders screamed orders into their comms, mobilizing the orbital defense platforms, targeting the behemoth with plasma lances and gravity shear cannons. But Valen hesitated. He watched the telemetry. The human ship had no shields raised. It had no weapons charged. It was powering down. The sheer audacity of it struck him like a physical blow. To arrive in the heart of an alien empire, a superpower that had ruled the stars for millennia, and to simply turn off one's engines. It was an act of supreme arrogance or supreme confidence. Or perhaps Valen thought with a shudder it was indifference. Perhaps to these humans, the Ethelgard were not a threat worth raising shields against. A communication channel opened. It did not use the standard subspace frequencies or the quantum entanglement pairs the Concordat utilized. It brute-forced its way into the high spire's internal address system, overriding the security protocols with a chaotic, messy algorithm that felt like a sledgehammer smashing through a glass door. The audio that filled the chamber was filled with static, the background hiss of cosmic radiation, and the deep, rhythmic thumping of heavy machinery. Then, a voice spoke. It was not the synthesized, harmonious voice of a translator drone. It was a biological voice, rough, tired, and laced with the imperfections of a living throat. "This is High Admiral Vance of the Terran Union," the voice grated, echoing off the crystalline walls. "We are not here to fight. We are here to remember. Stand down your weapons or you will break them against our hull." The threat was delivered without anger. It was a statement of fact, as dry and immutable as the laws of physics the Ethelgard cherished. Valen signaled the defense grid to hold fire, his curiosity warring with his pride. He signaled for a visual link. The holographic display shifted, resolving into the image of a bridge. It was a dark, cramped space, illuminated by the glow of tactical displays and the harsh white of emergency lighting. Wires hung from the ceiling in tangled bundles. Panels were removed, exposing the raw circuitry beneath. It looked less like a command center and more like the inside of a failing submarine. And there, sitting in a chair that looked too small for his armored frame, was the human. He was old. His face was a map of scars and deep lines, his skin pale from a life spent in the void. One of his eyes was gone, replaced by a glowing red optic that whirred as it focused on the camera. His arm, resting on the console, was metallic, a crude cybernetic replacement that lacked the elegance of Concordat prosthetics. He looked broken. He looked like a creature that had been chewed up by the universe and spat back out, held together by spite and rivets. And yet his gaze was steady. There was no fear in that organic eye, only a profound, crushing exhaustion. "You have violated the sovereignty of the Ethelgard," Valen announced, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You have defied the laws of travel. You have brought a weapon of mass destruction to our capital. Explain yourself, human, or we will vaporize your vessel where it drifts." The human admiral let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. He leaned forward, the gears in his shoulder grinding audibly. "Vaporize it?" he asked, a grim smile touching his lips. "Hierarch, this ship has flown through the hotosphere of a red giant. It has taken kinetic impacts that cracked moons. We didn't build the Akron to fight. We built it to endure. You talk of laws. Your laws are about how to move smoothly, how to live comfortably, how to keep the bloodlines pure. Our laws are different. Our law is that we do not leave anyone behind, not even the dead." The translation software struggled with the concept. Not even the dead. The Ethelgard disposed of their dead efficiently, recycling the biomass into the great gardens of Kaler, returning the energy to the system. To keep the dead was unhygienic, illogical, a waste of resources. Valen looked at the massive ship again, really looking at it this time. The sensors picked up something he had missed before. The ship was not just hull and engine. The core of the vessel, deep beneath the armor plating, was cold, near absolute zero, and it was dense, incredibly dense. It was filled with millions upon millions of faint energy signatures. "What is that ship?" Valen whispered, the horror dawning on him. "It is not a warship. It is a tomb," Vance replied softly, "and a cradle." The revelation sent a ripple of revulsion through the synod. A tomb ship, a vessel carrying the rotting corpses of a species. It was a violation of the blood. It was a desecration of the sanctity of life. To carry the dead across the stars was a madness that the Ethelgard could not comprehend. But Vance continued, his voice gaining strength, his single eye boring into the camera. "You think we defy your laws of physics because we are arrogant," Vance said. "We defy them because we ran out of time. We didn't come here to conquer you. We came here because our home is gone, our system is dead. We are the last, and we carry the patterns, the memories, the genetic codes of every human who ever lived, stored in the cryobanks and the data cores of this ship. This isn't just a vessel hierarch. This is humanity, all of it, condensed, frozen, waiting." The silence in the high spire was absolute. The scale of the tragedy was difficult to process. A species that had lost everything, yet refused to accept extinction. Instead of fading away, instead of accepting the great cycle, they had built a monster of a ship, an indestructible box to carry their ghosts, and they had hurled it through the most dangerous regions of space to find a safe harbor. They had defied the biological imperative to die. They had defied the physical imperative to stop. They had defied the blood and the law because the alternative was oblivion. But the Ethelgard were creatures of dogma. Fear quickly replaced awe. A ship filled with the data and biological material of a dead civilization was a plague waiting to happen. It was a violation of the natural order. Valen's advisors, the high priests of the genetic court, began to whisper frantically. They called it a necroarch. They argued that the humans were unclean, that their refusal to accept death was a corruption that could spread. They urged Valen to destroy it. If the humans were desperate, they were dangerous. If they had nothing left to lose, they would do anything. "You cannot stay here," Valen declared, his voice hardening. "Your vessel is an abomination against the cycle. We cannot harbor the dead. You must leave or be destroyed." On the screen, Admiral Vance did not flinch. He did not beg, he simply reached out and typed a command into his console. "We expected as much," he said. "The universe is a cold place. We learned that a long time ago, but before you open fire, Hierarch, you might want to look at your long-range sensors. The reason we ran, the reason our system died. It wasn't natural, it wasn't a supernova. It was hunted." The sensor officer in the high spire screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that cut through the diplomatic tension like a knife. The holographic display expanded, zooming out from Kaler, out past the rim of the Ethelgard Empire, out to the dark between galaxies. There, moving against the backdrop of the cosmic microwave background, was a shadow. It was not a ship. It was a cloud, a swarm. It was billions of independent entities moving as a single, fluid consciousness, stripping the stars of their energy as they passed. They were the entropy bringers, the silencers, the myth that every spacefaring civilization whispered about but never believed. They were the great filter made manifest. "We call them the swarm," Vance said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "They eat energy, they eat biology, they eat civilizations. We fought them for 100 years. We held them back at the Sol line while we built the asterisk Akron. We burned our own planets to deny them fuel. We sacrificed billions to buy the time to save the memory of our species. And now they are here." The Ethelgard hierarchs stared at the encroaching darkness. Their fleets, their orbital grids, their mastery of subspace tides, it all seemed suddenly insignificant. Against the tidal wave of destruction approaching their borders, the swarm did not care about laws. It did not care about bloodlines. It was the end of all things. "You led them here?" Valen accused, panic cracking his voice. "No," Vance corrected him, his tone sharp. "We beat them here, we broke our engines, we shattered our hull, we defied every law of relativity you hold dear to get here first asterisk. We came to warn you, and we came to make a stand." The human admiral stood up then, the servos in his legs whining. He looked like a titan of old, a battered god of war standing amidst the ruin of his own making. "You want to destroy us? Go ahead. But the Acheron is the only thing in this system with armor thick enough to survive the initial bombardment. It is the only thing with a data core vast enough to calculate the firing solutions you need. We are not asking for your permission to exist, Hierarch. We are offering you a shield." The sheer pragmatic weight of the offer hung in the air. The humans, reviled as necromancers and lawbreakers, had turned their tomb into a fortress. They had turned their grief into a weapon. Valen looked at the terrifying black slab in orbit, then at the terrified faces of his council, and finally at the encroaching dark on the sensors. He realized then that the Ethel Guard's obsession with order was a fragility. They had built a garden and they were unprepared for the storm. The humans had built a bunker. Why? Valen asked, the arrogance finally draining out of him, leaving only the frightened old creature beneath the shell. Why warn us? Why defend us? We would have destroyed you. Vance looked at the camera, and for a moment the weary soldier vanished, replaced by something ancient and profoundly sad. Because we remember, he said. We remember what it was like to scream into the dark and hear no answer. We decided that if we were going to survive, we wouldn't just be survivors, we would be the answer. The diplomatic channels opened wide. The Acheron began to broadcast data, tactical schematics, shield frequencies, weakness analysis of the swarm entities. It was a flood of information bought with human blood, a heritage of war handed over freely to a species that had looked upon them with disgust. The Ethel Guard engineers wept as they saw the data. They saw the impossible engineering of the human ship, the way they had woven the neural pathways of their dead into the ship's computer to create a processing network capable of outthinking the swarm. The abomination was a collective consciousness, a gestalt of a billion minds working in unison to preserve the flame of life. It was not a violation of the blood, it was the ultimate elevation of it. As the first tendrils of the swarm entered the system, blotting out the distant stars, the Acheron moved. It did not flee. It descended, placing its massive, scarred bulk directly between the planet Kaler and the incoming enemy. The Ethelgard fleet, sleek and golden, rallied behind the human dreadnought, looking like children hiding behind a scarred veteran. The battle that followed was not a contest of strategy, it was a meat grinder. The swarm hit the asterisk Acheron with beams of concentrated antimatter and waves of kinetic darts. The human ship did not dodge, it took the hits. Explosions blossomed across its hull, silent in the vacuum, scorching the black armor. But the ship held. It held because it was dense, layered with redundancy upon redundancy. Inside, the automated repair systems, guided by the digitized minds of deceased engineers, routed power, sealed breaches, and kept the guns firing. The Acheron unleashed a torrent of solid projectile munitions, ancient, primitive weapons by Concordat standards, but effective. Railguns shattered the crystalline carapaces of the swarm ships. Nuclear warheads, banned by Galactic treaty for eons, detonated in blinding flashes of fusion fire, carving holes in the enemy formation. On the bridge of the asterisk Acheron asterisk, Admiral Vance watched the shield integrity drop. 40%, 30%. The ship groaned, the metal screaming under the stress. But he was calm. He could hear them, the voices of the crew, the voices of the stored minds, the chorus of humanity whispering in the data stream. They were not afraid. They had died once already, they had nothing left to fear. Hierarch Valen, Vance radioed, his voice steady over the roar of damage alarms. Target the coordinates we are transmitting. We are going to overload our reactor coolant. We will create a thermal bloom that will strip their stealth coating. When we light them up, you burn them. That will irradiate your hull, Valen shouted back, his voice filled with a strange, new emotion, respect. You will kill your crew. My crew is already dead, Hierarch, Vance replied. We are just the caretakers. Fire on my mark. The Acheron vented its coolant. A cloud of superheated plasma erupted from the ship, expanding outward like a fiery flower. It engulfed the swarm vanguard, stripping away their refractive camouflage. Suddenly, the enemy was visible, millions of jagged, insected vessels exposed to the naked eye. The Ethelgard fleet, seeing the target, unleashed their fury. Golden lances of light pierced the darkness, incinerating the confused swarm. The combination of human brutality and alien precision turned the tide. The swarm, faced with an enemy that refused to break, faltered. They had consumed 1,000 worlds, but they had never fought a ghost. Hours turned into days. The siege of Kaler was brutal. Debris rained down into the atmosphere, creating streaks of fire in the sky. The Acheron was a ruin. Its bridge was exposed to vacuum, the crew fighting in pressure suits. Its main guns were melted slag, but it still floated, a stubborn, unyielding obstruction in the throat of the enemy. And finally, the swarm broke. Calculating that the energy expenditure required to destroy the human monolith exceeded the potential caloric gain of the system, the hive mind made a logical retreat. They peeled away, vanishing back into the dark. Silence returned to the Kaler system, but it was not the haughty, orderly silence of the past. It was a stunned, reverent silence. The Ethelgard fleet drifted near the asterisk Acheron asterisk, their sensors scanning the devastation. The human ship was dead in the water. No lights. No engine hum, just a drifting hulk of scorched metal. Valen personally led the boarding party. He did not send soldiers, he sent engineers and medics, though he knew there was little they could do for the biologicals. They entered through a breach in the airlock, navigating the twist of corridors. The gravity was offline. Floating in the zero-G were the frozen droplets of coolant and blood. They found the bridge. Admiral Vance was strapped into his chair, his suit power failing. He was alive, barely. His organic eye was closed, but the cybernetic one still glowed faintly, a dying ember. Valen floated closer, placing a manipulator claw gently on the human's armored shoulder. For the first time in the history of the Ethelgard, a high hierarch touched an alien with something other than contempt. "Admiral," Valen whispered, "the enemy has withdrawn. Kaler stands." Vance's eye opened. He looked at the alien, and a faint smile touched his cracked lips. "Good," he wheezed. "Good. Your ship." Valen began looking around at the devastation. "We can repair it. We have resources. We can rebuild the hull." Vance shook his head, a microscopic movement. "The hull doesn't matter. The core. Check the core. Is the data intact? Are they safe?" Valen motioned to his tech priest, who hurriedly plugged a diagnostic wand into the console. The priest's eyes went wide. The holographic display flickered to life. It didn't show weapon systems or engine status. It showed a directory. Names, billions of them, scrolling past at blinding speed. Files, memories, histories, songs, art, science, the sum total of a civilization preserved in the crystalline matrix of the ship's heart. "Integrity is 98%, the priest reported, his voice trembling. "The cooling systems for the data core were prioritized above life support. The crew, they diverted power from the heat to the memory banks." Valen stared at the human. They had chosen to freeze to death so that the memories of their ancestors would not degrade. They had sacrificed the living for the legacy. It was a concept so alien, yet so terrifyingly noble that it shattered Valen's understanding of the blood. This was not necromancy. This was love, a love so fierce it defied the instinct for self-preservation. "They are safe," Valen said, bowing his head. "Your people are safe." Vance let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension left his body. "Then the mission is done." "No," Valen said firmly. "The mission has changed. You defied the blood and the law to save us. Now we will rewrite the law. You will not drift. You will not be forgotten." The recovery of the Acheron took a solar cycle. The Ethelgard did not just repair the ship, they sanctified it. They wove their own crystalline technology into the human steel, creating a hybrid vessel that was stronger than either could have achieved alone. The Necroarch became the cenotaph of stars. The human survivors, fewer than 10,000 biologicals left from a crew of 50,000, were given a home on Kaler, a distinct enclave where the gravity was high and the light was yellow, but most chose to stay on the ship. They were the Guardians. The alliance that formed was not political, it was spiritual. The Ethelgard had learned that order was not enough, one needed will. And the humans had learned that they were no longer alone in the dark. But the story did not end with the retreat of the swarm. The twist, the true realization of what humanity had brought to the galaxy, came when the Ethelgard scientists finally cracked the encryption on the deepest layer of the asterisk Acrons. Database, they were looking for star charts for the origin point of the swarm. What they found was a history file dated 10,000 years prior. Hierarch Valen stood in the newly dedicated memorial hall of the asterisk Acron asterisk, watching the file play. It showed Earth, the human homeworld in its early days, but it also showed the sky. And in the sky, observing the primitive humans, were ships. Golden, crystalline ships. Ships that looked exactly like the ancient progenitors of the Ethelgard fleet. The voice on the recording was human, an ancient scientist speaking from the grave of history. "We have analyzed the visitors," the voice said. "They are not here to help. They are gardeners. They are pruning the genetic lines of the galaxy. They destroyed the Martians. They destroyed the Venusian biospheres. They are steering us, limiting us, culling the aggressive traits. We are an experiment to them. But we are an experiment that has learned to hide." Valen felt the world spin. The Ethelgard's religion, their belief in the garden of the universe, was not a divine truth. It was a programming protocol left by their ancestors. The Ethelgard were the gardeners, and the humans were the weeds that had refused to be plucked. The swarm was not a random monster. It was the automated cleanup crew sent by the ancient Ethelgard progenitors to wipe the slate clean when the experiment got out of control. The Great Silencer was not an external threat. It was the Ethelgard's own legacy, returning to finish the job. Vance, now recovering in a hovering mobility chair, watched the realization dawn on the alien's face. "We knew," Vance said quietly. "We knew it was your ancestors who made the swarm. We found the signature in the code. And yet you saved us," Valen whispered, horrified. "You saved the children of your executioners." "We don't believe in the sins of the father," Vance replied, looking out the viewport at the stars. "And besides, look at you now, you aren't them. You broke the cycle. You allied with the abomination. You saved the dead. You have changed." Valen looked at his claws, then at the human. He realized the magnitude of what had happened. The humans had not just defied the laws of physics. They had defied the script of the galaxy. They had broken the cycle of destruction by answering attempted genocide with mercy. They had brought the blood of the past and the law of the future and smashed them together to create something new. The swarm will return, Valen said, the horror replaced by a cold, steely resolve. They will come back to finish the pruning. Let them come, Vance said, his cybernetic eye gleaming with a red, defiant light. The Ethelgard fleets are strong, and the Acheron is ready. We have defied biology, we have defied gravity, we have defied fate. I think it's time we defied the gods themselves. The scene shifted to the exterior of the ship. The Acheron asterisk, now streaked with veins of gold and crystal, powered up. Its engines did not roar, they sang, a harmony of human grunt and alien hymn. It turned its prow toward the deep dark, toward the source of the signal, toward the ancient creators who sought to silence the noise of life. Beside it, the Ethelgard armada fell into formation, no longer enforcing the peace of a garden but preparing for the war of the free. The universe was vast, cold, and cruel. It was governed by entropy and silence. But as the combined fleet jumped, punching a hole through the fabric of reality with a defiance that shook the stars, it became clear that the laws were merely suggestions to those who had the will to break them. The human warship had defied blood and law, and in doing so it had forged a new truth. Life does not merely exist to die. It exists to remember, and it exists to fight. The stars watched, the silence waited, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the roar of a defiance that would echo until the end of time.